This is a story by Kenneth Grahame called The Wind in the Willows. The riverbank. Mole had been working very hard all morning, spring cleaning, first with brooms and dusters, then standing on a little table with a brush and a pot of paint, slap, slap, up and down till he was aching all over. Suddenly he flung down his brush, said, "Bother," and hung spring cleaning and bolted out of the house into the fields outside. "This is fine," he said to himself. "This is better than painting the house." First he met some rabbits as he rambled along the hedgerows. Soon he found himself by a river. Mole sat down on the grassy bank, and then he saw, coming out of a dark hole on the other side, a brown little face with whiskers. It was the water rat. "Hello, Mole," said Rat. "I'll come over in my boat to fetch you." "Do you know, I've never been in a boat before in all my life," said Mole. "What?" cried Rat. "In that case, let's go down the river together and make a day of it." He rowed quickly back across the water with Mole. Rat popped into his hole in the bank and came staggering out a few moments later with a heavy picnic basket. They rowed down the river, past the wildwood, as far as an old water mill. There, Rat brought his boat alongside the riverbank so that they could set out the picnic. "What have we got?" asked Mole, who was hungry. "There's chicken and ham and salad and lemonade and cake and chocolate biscuits." "Oh my," said Mole. A few minutes later, when they were feeling much better and not so hungry, a very wet and furry head suddenly appeared out of the water above the edge of the riverbank. It was Otter. "You greedy beggars," he said, "why didn't you invite me?" And he set about helping them finish up the picnic. "All the world seems to be out on the river today," said Otter, wiping his paws on his whiskers. "Toad's out for one, in his brand new boat, and wearing his new boating clothes." Just then, Toad flashed into view, rowing rapidly past the watermill. Rat stood up excitedly and waved to him, but Toad just shook his head and rowed on. By now, they had eaten all the food. Otter was in the middle of telling them a story about Toad and beginning to feel a bit peckish again, when suddenly he saw a juicy mayfly. With hardly a splash, he was gone. So Mole and Rat packed up the picnic things and got back into the boat to go home. Rat was rowing gently along when Mole said, "Ratty, please, I want to row now." "Not yet, Mole," replied Rat. "It's not as easy as it looks." But Mole jumped up and grabbed the oars, knocking the rat backwards. "Stop it," cried Rat. "You'll have us both over." And over they went, splush, and they were both struggling in the water. Rat, of course, was a good swimmer and thought it was very funny. Having rescued Mole and got him to the riverbank to dry off, he plunged back into the water to recover his boat. Finally, he dived down to the bottom of the river to rescue the picnic basket. "I am sorry, Ratty," said Mole dejectedly. When they eventually got home, Rat sat Mole in front of a bright fire to warm him up, and to cheer him up, he told him river stories until supper time. So supper was a very happy meal, and soon afterwards Rat showed a very sleepy Mole upstairs to the best bedroom for the night. The open road. Rat was sitting on the riverbank one bright summer morning singing a song when Mole said, "Please, Ratty, Would you take me to call on Mr. Toad?" "Why, certainly," said the good-natured rat. "We'll go in the boat." "There's Toad Hall," said Rat as they rounded a bend in the river. "Toad is rather rich, you know. Come along and let's find him." Toad saw them coming across the lawn. "Hooray!" he cried. "This is splendid. You are the very animals I wanted to see. You've got to help me." "Is it about rowing?" asked Rat. "Oh, I've given up that long ago," said Toad airily. "No, I've discovered the real thing. Come with me just as far as the stable yard and you shall see." And there it was, a gypsy caravan, shining and new, painted yellow and green with red wheels. "Who's for a life on the open road here today, up and off somewhere else tomorrow?" said Toad gaily. "This is the finest cart of its sort that was ever built. Come inside and have a look. Planned it all myself." Mole was tremendously interested inside, but Rat just sat on the doorstep. "All complete," said Toad. "Chocolate, biscuits, tinned fruit, lemonade, even games to play. You'll find that nothing has been forgotten when we make our start this afternoon." "Did I hear," said Rat slowly, "something about we and start this afternoon?" "Oh, come on, Ratty. I want to show you the world," said Toad. There was quite an argument, but in the end Toad was able to persuade Mole and Rat to go with him. And so they harnessed Toad's horse and set off through the lovely countryside. Friendly passers-by called out "Good day" to them or stopped to say nice things about their beautiful caravan. And lots of rabbits sat up on their hind legs and said, oh my," as they saw them pass by. Late in the evening, tired and happy and miles from home, they stopped and had supper, sitting on the grass by the roadside. Toad boasted about all the things he was going to do. He talked until he was too tired to go on, and they all went to bed in their little bunks in the caravan. Poor Rat was obviously missing the river. "Shall we run away tomorrow?" whispered Mole. "No," whispered back Rat. "We'll stick by Toad until this trip is ended. He wouldn't be safe by himself." Nor was he safe with Mole and Rat. Next day, as they were going along the road, Mole leading the horse and Toad and Rat walking behind the caravan, there was suddenly an imperious whoop whoop behind them. A motor car whizzed by in a cloud of dust and noise. The horse bucked and reared, dragging poor Mole off his feet. The caravan finished up in the ditch, and Toad finished up sitting in the middle of the road. It was a long walk for the three animals to the nearest town, where they found somebody to look after the horse and what was left of the caravan. But Toad wasn't at all upset. He could talk of nothing but that wonderful thing, the motor car, which had caused the accident. Next evening, when Mole was sitting by the river, fishing, Rat came up. "Heard the news?" he said. "Toad has ordered a large and expensive motor car." The Wild Wood. For a long time, Mole had wanted to meet the badger, but Rat obviously was not keen. So one day at the beginning of winter, while Rat dozed in front of his fire, Mole set off to explore the wild wood, hoping to bump into Mr. Badger. It was a cold afternoon. Everything was very still. It was getting dark. Then the faces began. Meanwhile, Rat had been having a lovely warm doze by the fire. When he woke up at last, he called, "Moley, several times, but there was no answer. Then he found that Mole's cap was missing from the peg in the hall, and when he opened the door, he saw Mole's tracks in the mud leading away from the house straight towards the wild wood. Rat armed himself with a pair of pistols and a stout cudgel, and set off bravely into the wild wood. He searched for over an hour, calling, "Moley, Moley, where are you?" At last he heard an answering little cry coming from a hole at the foot of a tree. He looked inside, and there was Mole. "Oh, Ratty," he cried, "I've been so frightened." "Now then," said Rat, "we must pull ourselves together and get going. It would never do to spend the night here." "Dear Ratty," said Mole, "I'm so tired. I must rest a bit longer." And Mole snuggled down into the dry leaves and went to sleep. When at last Mole woke up, Rat looked outside to see if it was safe to go. It was snowing hard and the whole wild wood was white. "We must make a start and take our chance," said Rat. They trudged for more than an hour through the snow, getting more and more lost, when Mole tripped and hurt his leg. "Poor old Mole," said Rat, "you've cut your leg. I'll tie it up for you." Rat was scratching away at the snow where Mole had tripped up. He found a door scraper and was very excited. Some careless person has left his door scraper lying about where it's sure to trip everybody up, said Mole, and he sat on it to rest his leg. But Rat was scrabbling away again, making the snow fly in all directions until he found a doormat. "There!" he cried in triumph. Poor old Mole didn't quite know what he was on about. Rat now attacked the snow bank beside them. Mole scraped busily too. 10 minutes hard work and they found a solid little door, painted dark green. Beside it was a brass plate which read, "Mr. Badger." Mole was chattering away in his excitement, but Rat said, "Get up and hang on to that bell pull and ring as hard as you can while I hammer on the door." Mr. Badger. At last they heard the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the door from the inside. There was a noise of a bolt being shot back. The door opened, and there was Mr. Badger. "Oh, Badger, let us in, please," cried Rat. "We've lost our way in the snow." "Come on into the kitchen," said Badger kindly. "There's a fire there and supper." Badger sat the two of them down by the fireside and told them to take off their wet coats and boots. Then he fetched them dressing gowns and slippers and put some sticking plaster on the cut on Mole's leg. And as he started laying the table for a lovely supper, both Rat and Mole felt they were miles away from the wild wood outside. After supper they all sat round the fire and talked about Toad's troubles with his new love of driving fast cars until it was time for bed. Then Mr. Badger took Rat and Mole up to the spare bedroom in the loft, where there were 2 beds surrounded by all his winter stores. When they came down to breakfast, very late next morning, Rat and Mole found 2 young hedgehogs eating porridge out of wooden bowls. They also had been lost in the snow. And hardly had they all sat down together when there was a clanging of the doorbell, a stamping of feet in the hall, and in rushed Otter. "They've all been so worried about you on the river bank," he cried. Soon after breakfast, Mr. Badger sent the 2 hedgehogs off home and suggested the others should stay for lunch. Mole told him how much he liked living underground. "When lunch is over," agreed Mr. Badger, "I'll take you all around this place of mine." And true to his promise, he lit a lantern and showed Mole all over his house, through narrow passages, long corridors, vaults and storerooms. When they got back to the kitchen again, they found that Rat was very restless. "Come on, Mole," he said anxiously. "We must get off. We don't want another night in the wild wood." "It'll be all right," said Otter. "I'm coming with you." So they all said goodbye to Mr. Badger, and Otter led them safely home. Mr. Toad. On a bright sunny morning early in the summer, Mole and Rat had been busy with the boat. They had been painting and varnishing and mending the paddles, and they were just finishing their breakfast in the parlour when there was a heavy knock on the door. "Bother," said Rat, all over egg. "See who it is, Mole, will you?" It was Mr. Badger. He strode heavily into the room, looking very, very serious. "Toad's hour has come," he said solemnly. "This very morning another new and very powerful motor car will arrive at Toad Hall. You two must come with me at once and stop him doing any further harm." "Right you are," cried Rat, starting up. "We'll rescue Toad. We'll convert him." The three of them set off up the road, and when they reached the carriage drive of Toad Hall, they found a shiny, new, bright red motor car standing in front of the house. And just as they arrived, Toad came out dressed in goggles, cap, and enormous overcoat. "Hello, you fellows," he began cheerfully. "You're just in time to come for a jolly." But Rat and Mole grabbed him. Mr. Badger strode up the steps to the front door. "Take him inside," he said sternly to his companions. Then he turned to the chauffeur in charge of the new car. "I'm afraid you won't be wanted today," he said. "Mr. Toad has changed his mind." And he followed the others inside. "Now then," said Mr. Badger to Mole and Rat, "take those silly driving clothes off him." Toad was kicking and struggling, so Rat sat on him while Mole got the motoring clothes off him bit by bit. "You've taken no notice of our warning," said Mr. Badger severely. "You're getting us all a bad name by your furious driving." "I'll make one more effort to bring you to reason," went on Mr. Badger. "You come with me into the smoking room." 3/4 of an hour later, Mr. Badger reappeared with a limp and tearful Toad. "He's very sorry, and he's going to give up motor cars forever," announced Mr. Badger. Mr. Badger asked Toad to repeat in front of his friends what he had just said in the smoking room. They all looked at him. "No," he said, "I'm not sorry. In fact, the first motor car I see, poop poop, off I go in it." "What?" cried Mr. Badger. "You backsliding animal, you. Take him upstairs, you two, and lock him in his bedroom." "It's going to be a long business," said Mr. Badger, sighing. "I've never seen Toad so determined." And true enough, while he was locked in his room, Toad would arrange the bedroom chairs to look like a motor car. Then he would pretend that he was in the driving seat and drive along, poop poop, until he had an accident. One day, when Mole and Mr. Badger had gone out for a ramble in the woods, Rat went upstairs to see Toad and found him still in bed. "Ratty," he murmured feebly. "Would you go to the village quickly and fetch a doctor? Even now it may be too late." Rat hurried from the room, being very careful, however, to lock the door behind him. It's best to be on the safe side, he said to himself. I'd better humour him and go, he thought. If there's nothing really the matter, the doctor will tell him he's an old ass. So he ran off to the village on his errand of mercy. Little did he know that Toad had hopped out of bed as soon as he heard the key turn in the lock. Toad got dressed quickly in his best suit and filled his pockets with money. Then he took the sheets off his bed. He tied them together and fastened one end to the centre mullion of his window. He scrambled out of the window, held onto the sheets very tightly, and slid gently to the ground below. Taking the opposite direction to Rat, Toad scampered off happily, whistling a merry tune. Poor Rat felt a terrible fool when Mr. Badger and Mole came back, and he had to tell them that Toad had escaped. "You've been a bit of a duffer this time, Ratty," said Mole. "Toad, too, of all animals." "He did it awfully well," said Rat. Meanwhile, Toad, gay and irresponsible, walked briskly along. "Smart piece of work that," he said to himself, chuckling, and when he reached the little town, he went into the hotel and ordered a slap-up lunch for himself to celebrate his escape. He was halfway through his meal when he heard a poop-poop and a motor car stopped outside. The occupants came inside, and Toad could contain himself no longer. Out into the yard he went to have a look. "I wonder if this sort of car starts easily," he murmured. Of course, Toad just could not resist the temptation. He got in, started the engine, and drove out of the yard. He drove out of the town and sped through the open country beyond. He felt that he was Toad once more. Toad at his best, Toad the terror, the traffic queller. The miles were eaten up, and under him as he went, he knew not whither, living his hour, reckless of what might come to him. "Let me see," said the magistrate. "He is guilty of stealing a motor car, of driving dangerously, and of cheeking the police. What's the stiffest penalty we can give him?" 20 years, said the clerk. "Excellent," said the magistrate. So a poor Toad was taken off to prison, loaded with chains. They had to drag him from the courthouse, shrieking and protesting, past the crowds in the marketplace and across the drawbridge of the grim old castle. They took the unhappy Toad past sentries and guardrooms full of grinning soldiers. They led him right to the door of the grimmest dungeon that lay in the heart of the innermost keep in the castle. The rusty key creaked in the lock, the great door clanged behind him, and Toad was a helpless prisoner.